My name is Caroline Stewart, and I'm same age as the original narrator. For the last year, my life has been about one thing: rebuilding. It's strange how quickly a life can flip. One day, you're someone people listen to in a boardroom. The next, you're the woman standing in her own kitchen, staring at a spreadsheet at 2:17 a.m., trying to figure out how long your savings can keep the lights on without making you feel like you're drowning in your own silence. I used to be a senior analyst at a big investment firm. I had the title, the salary, the glossy certainty that comes with having your name on the right email threads. I wasn't naive. I knew companies cut people every day. But when the restructuring happened and my entire division was eliminated, it didn't feel like just business. It felt like being erased. For a few months after, I was in a tailspin. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, no shattered glasses or screaming into the night. Mine was quieter, a constant hum of shame under everything. I would wake up exhausted, even when I'd slept 8 hours, because my brain spent the night replaying every conversation, every meeting, every tiny mistake that might have made me disposable. During that time, my boyfriend of 2 years, Ethan, acted like my anchor. We lived in an apartment I own, a place I bought back when my career was flying high. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. Brick walls, wide windows, and the kind of hardwood floors that make everything feel warmer than it actually is. When I lost my job, we made an agreement. I would use my savings to cover the mortgage and the shared bills while I figured out my next move. It was supposed to be temporary, just a bridge to get me to the other side. I remember feeling grateful. Grateful that Ethan wasn't panicking. Grateful that he wasn't walking out. I didn't realize he was keeping score. Ethan worked as a junior executive at a massive, prestigious wealth management firm called Sterling Thorne, the kind of place where your last name matters more than your last performance review. An old money institution with marble hallways, quiet power, and people who speak in polished sentences that never quite reveal what they're thinking. Ethan loved it. No, he didn't just love it, he worshipped it. His boss, Alistair Croft, was a legend in the industry, the kind of man people mentioned the way you'd mention a king. Ethan talked about him like he hung the moon. Croft said this. Croft believes that. Croft noticed my presentation. It wasn't admiration, it was devotion. At first, I thought it was harmless. Ethan was ambitious. I understood ambition. I had built my life on it. But as the months went on, and I was still working on building a small, independent consulting practice from our spare bedroom, Ethan's support started to curdle. It wasn't sudden. It was small, surgical. He'd walk past my desk and glance at my notes like they were doodles. He'd sigh dramatically when I was on a late-night call with a potential client. He started referring to my work like it was a hobby, like I was building model ships in the living room instead of trying to claw my way back into the industry. One night, I was preparing a pitch deck, and he leaned in the doorway with a drink in his hand and said, too casually, "Just don't get your hopes up, okay? Consulting is cute, but it's not a real comeback." Cute. Like I was a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. I remember swallowing my anger because I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the unemployed girlfriend who became difficult. I wanted to believe we were still a team, even if we were temporarily off balance. I wanted to believe Ethan was just stressed. But there's a difference between stress and contempt. And once you hear contempt in someone's voice, you can't unhear it. The final straw, the moment the entire foundation of our relationship started turning to dust, came yesterday morning. I had an interview. Not just any interview. It was for a newly created Director of Strategy position at Northgate Capital, a younger, more aggressive company making waves in the industry. They were the disruptors, the people Sterling Thorne whispered about like they were an infection. It was a long shot, but it was the first real opportunity I'd had in a year to get back to where I was before. I woke up early and put on my best suit. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my collar, telling myself to breathe like I had done 100 times before. But my hands were shaking, not from fear of the interview, from fear of hope. Hope is dangerous when you've been disappointed too many times. You start to treat it like a trap. Ethan walked into the room already dressed for his own day at Sterling Thorne. Tailored coat, crisp shirt, the faint scent of expensive cologne. He didn't look at me at first. He was checking his reflection in the window, like the glass was more important than my face. I forced a smile. "Wish me luck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He let out a short, sharp sound, a snort, not even an attempt to hide it. "Luck won't fix you," he said, voice dripping with casual cruelty. "They'll see right through you like everyone else does." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an insult, it was a summary judgment on my ambition, on my effort, on the year I had spent grinding myself down to bone, trying to build something from nothing while pretending I wasn't terrified. He wasn't just kicking me when I was down. He was grinding his heel into my neck and calling it honesty. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, because something inside me had gone perfectly, unnaturally still. I watched Ethan in the reflection, the way his mouth curved like he'd said something clever, the way his eyes flicked to me like he was waiting for the reaction he deserved. The old me would have begged. The old me would have said, "Why would you say that?" The old me would have tried to make him understand how much it hurt. But in that moment, the Caroline who loved him just ceased to exist. She didn't die loudly. She didn't scream. She simply stepped back, like she was leaving her body, leaving the room, leaving the version of my life where Ethan's opinion mattered more than my own. I nodded, slowly, deliberately. "You might be right," I said, and my voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was completely devoid of emotion. Ethan finally turned to look at me, and there it was, his smug little smirk. He thought he had broken me. He thought his words had confirmed my deepest fears. He had no idea he had just handed me a weapon. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it makes you invisible. And invisible people can do a lot of damage before anyone notices. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. My heartbeat was calm now, like my body had made a decision without asking me for permission. Behind me, Ethan called out, sweet as poison. "Hey, don't be dramatic. I'm just being realistic." Realistic. Like love was supposed to sound like a verdict. I didn't answer him. I stepped into the hallway and the door clicked shut behind me. And just like that, I walked out of my apartment a different woman. The nervousness I felt about the interview was gone, replaced by something sharper, cleaner, almost dangerous. Ethan thought they'd see right through me. Good, because I was about to show him what was on the other side. Northgate Capital's headquarters was all glass and steel, modern, bright, like it was built to reflect the future back at you. I expected a hiring manager, maybe a panel. Instead, after a short wait, a woman in a fitted blazer came to the lobby and said, "Ms. Stewart, this way." She didn't take me to a conference room. She took me to an elevator requiring a key card, then to a floor that felt quieter than the rest of the building, then to a large corner office with windows that made the city look like something you could hold in your palm. A man sat behind the desk. He didn't stand when I walked in. He didn't smile. He just looked at me like he was weighing something. And the moment I saw him, I felt my stomach drop, because I recognized him instantly. Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Northgate Capital, the Thorne from Sterling Thorne. The man Ethan's colleagues spoke about like a cautionary tale, how Marcus had left the family firm 10 years ago in a bitter dispute and built their biggest rival from the ashes of that feud. A shark, a legend. And he didn't suffer fools. He had my resume in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me. "So," he said, voice a low, controlled growl, "you used to be one of them." He paused like he wanted the weight of that sentence to sink in. "Why do you want to be one of us?" The old me would have given a polished corporate answer. The old me would have tried to impress him. But Ethan's snort was still ringing in my ears like a bell. So I told the truth. I told Marcus about being laid off, about the brutal reality of a changing industry, about the year I spent in the wilderness, building my own firm from the ground up. I didn't dress it up. I didn't pretend it was glamorous. I talked about the failures, the lessons, the way you learn a market when you're no longer protected by a company name. And then, without realizing it at first, I started laying out my vision. Not a vague motivational pitch, a real strategy. An unsolicited analysis of Northgate's position, where Sterling Thorne was vulnerable, where their bureaucracy slowed them down, where their obsession with legacy made them predictable. I had been working on it for months as part of my consulting work. It was my masterpiece. As I spoke, I watched Marcus's expression shift, not into friendliness, but into focus, like he was seeing something he didn't expect to find. For an hour, I held the attention of one of the most powerful men in finance. When I finished, the room went silent. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "They didn't see what they had," he said. "It wasn't a question. It was a judgment." And I realized something then, something that made Ethan's words feel smaller. This man wasn't looking at me like I was broken. He was looking at me like I was useful. "The director position is yours if you want it," Marcus continued, tapping my resume once. "But I have a better idea." My pulse thudded once, hard. He leaned back slightly, like he'd already decided. "I'm creating a role," he said. "Vice President of Special Projects. You report directly to me. Your only job is to identify and attack the vulnerabilities of our competition. He paused. Your primary target is Sterling Thorne. My mind flashed to Ethan's face, his snort, his smirk, his certainty that I was finished. I should have felt shocked. I should have felt dizzy. Instead, I felt calm, like the universe had just opened a door and said, "Here, walk through, don't look back." "I accept," I said. Marcus's smile sharpened. "Good." Then I took a breath and added the one condition I already knew I needed. "I need 2 weeks," I said. "Complete discretion, no announcement, no leaks. My personal situation is complicated. I need time to extricate myself." Marcus studied me for a second, intrigued. Then he nodded. 2 weeks, he agreed. "Disappear if you have to, but when you come back." He leaned forward, eyes cold. You come back as a problem. I left that building with something bigger than a job offer. I left with a weapon, and I already knew exactly where I was going to aim it. When I got home that evening, Ethan was in the kitchen, scrolling on his phone like he owned the world. He looked up lazily. "So?" I forced my shoulders to slump. I forced my eyes to look tired. I played the part. "It was a disaster," I said quietly. "You were right." The change in Ethan was immediate, like someone flipped a switch. The condescension softened into a cloying, suffocating pity. He walked over and patted my shoulder like I was a dog that had failed a trick. "Aw, babe," he murmured. "It's okay. Your little consulting thing is honestly adorable. You'll find your footing." He smiled like he was generous for staying, and I smiled back. Because he was so high on his own superiority, he didn't notice I had already left him behind. For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost. Not in the poetic way people romanticize when they talk about reinvention. I didn't dye my hair or fly to some beach city and find myself. I still slept in my own bed, still brushed my teeth at the same sink, still listened to Ethan's keys hit the counter every night like he was placing a crown down after a long day of being important. But emotionally, I wasn't there anymore. I was watching, measuring, collecting. And the first thing I collected was proof of something I couldn't unsee once Ethan made his cruelty obvious. He wasn't just disappointed in me. He was embarrassed by me. That's what it always comes down to with people like him. Not your pain, not your effort, not your humanity. Just optics. The morning after my disastrous interview, Ethan lingered in the doorway of my spare bedroom office. My office, technically, since it was my apartment, my mortgage, my credit score stitched into every corner of this place. He looked around at the modest setup, my secondhand desk, my laptop, the corkboard full of client notes and market maps, like he was touring a museum exhibit titled How the Other Half Lives. "You know," he said casually, "Sterling Thorne is doing a charity initiative next quarter. Croft's big thing, very exclusive." He paused, watching me carefully. "It's the kind of world you just don't understand." The old Caroline might have taken the bait, might have asked questions, might have tried to impress him by pretending she didn't feel small. But the Caroline that left the apartment on interview morning? She understood the game now. I lowered my gaze, kept my voice soft. "You're right," I said. "I don't." Ethan looked satisfied, like my humility was the rent I paid to stay near him. He went to work that day glowing with superiority. He didn't even notice I was smiling to myself. Because while he was playing king in an old money castle, I was stepping into a different kind of kingdom. That rented office space I told Ethan I was using to rebuild my consulting leads, it wasn't just a co-working desk with free coffee. It was a short-term suite Marcus Thorne's team had arranged. Minimal signage, discreet entry, the kind of place built for people who didn't want a trail. The first day I walked in, I didn't feel like a triumphant comeback story. I felt like I was standing on a ledge between the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant patience, and the woman Marcus Thorne had just invited into his world. A world where people didn't apologize for power. They used it. Marcus was already there, standing by a wall of windows, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't turn when I entered. He just raised a finger. "Wait," and I did. When he finished the call, he finally looked at me. "Stewart," he said, like my last name was a tool. "Sit." I sat. He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were names, divisions, numbers, timelines. A blueprint of Sterling Thorne's most profitable unit, exactly the kind of thing Ethan would have bragged about knowing, except he didn't actually know anything real. He only knew what made him feel important. Marcus watched me read. "I'm not paying you to be angry," he said. "I'm paying you to be accurate." I swallowed the heat that flickered in my chest. "Understood." "Good," he murmured. "Now tell me where they break." That was the moment I realized what made Marcus Thorne terrifying. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't threaten. He just assumed you would perform. And somehow that assumption made you want to. For hours, we went through Sterling Thorne's structure, their weaknesses, their blind spots. And I did what I do best. I found the cracks in the foundation. Their culture was tradition-heavy, slow to approve anything bold. Their partnerships were political, not strategic. Their biggest clients were loyal, but loyalty gets expensive when someone else offers better returns and fewer headaches. By the end of the day, Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing with satisfaction. "You're not just a strategist," he said quietly. "You're a knife." I didn't smile. "You hired me to cut." "Exactly," he said. "And you're going to start with a raid." My stomach tightened. "A raid?" Marcus tapped the folder. "Talent, clients, deals, whatever they think they own." His gaze held mine. "Sterling Thorne has lived too long believing they're untouchable." He paused, voice lowering. "You're going to remind them they're not." Every day after that, I kept the same rhythm. Morning, I went to my consulting meetings. Reality, I went to Marcus. Night, I came home and played the role Ethan assigned me. Quiet, grateful, diminished. Reality, I was mapping his world like a battlefield. Ethan loved those 2 weeks, because in his mind, he had won. He started leaving little hints of pity all over the apartment like crumbs. He'd toss me a motivational podcast link. He'd suggest I volunteer somewhere for confidence. He'd call his colleagues while I was within earshot and casually mention how he was holding things down at home. And every time he did it, something inside me hardened further. Not into bitterness, into precision. One night, Ethan came home buzzing, tossing his coat over a chair, like he didn't respect furniture unless it was expensive. "You know what's coming up?" he said, pouring himself a drink. I kept my eyes on my laptop. "What?" "The Sterling Thorne Foundation Gala," he said like it was a holy day. "The museum one, Croft's pet event." He smiled, and for a moment I saw the boyish thrill in him, the hunger to be seen by important people. Then his expression shifted, and it became something uglier. A calculated little pity. "It's a very high-level event, babe," he said, not even looking at me. "Major players only." I waited. He didn't offer an invitation. He wasn't going to. "You would just feel out of place," he added, like he was doing me a favor by saying it gently. I forced my shoulders to sink, forced my voice to soften. "I understand," I said. Ethan nodded, satisfied. "Good. I just don't want you uncomfortable." That was the lie people like him tell. Not to protect you, to protect their image. After he went to shower, I sat alone in the dim glow of my laptop and let the silence settle. And then I whispered to myself, quiet, almost calm, out of place. I repeated the words like a rehearsal. The next day at the office, Marcus was flipping through a stack of documents when I walked in. "Your gala," he said without looking up. I froze. "Excuse me?" He finally lifted his eyes. "Sterling Thorne's Foundation Gala. Croft's speech. The museum." My heartbeat hitched. "How do you—" Marcus waved a hand like it was obvious. "They announce promotions there. It's where they parade loyalty and pretend it's legacy." His mouth curved slightly. "It's also where they're most vulnerable." I didn't speak. Marcus studied me like he was reading the thought on my face. "Your boyfriend works there," he said. Not a question. I felt my throat tighten. "Yes. And he doesn't know," Marcus said. "About me. About you." "No," I said softly. Marcus leaned forward. "Good. Keep it that way." Something cold slid down my spine. "Why?" Marcus's gaze sharpened. "Because I don't want them to see you coming," he said. "I want them to see you arrive." That night, Ethan talked about the gala like it was a ladder he was climbing. He went on about Alistair Croft's taste, the guest list, the donors. And then he said something that made me realize how completely he underestimated me. "You know, Caroline," he said, swirling his drink, "this is why I need a partner who can keep up." I looked at him. "Keep up with what?" "With my world," he said simply. "The pace, the expectations, the standards." He smiled like he expected me to accept it, like it was natural that his world was the world, and I was just allowed to orbit. I lowered my gaze again. "I get it," I murmured. Ethan's face softened with satisfaction. "Good." He reached across the counter and brushed my cheek like he was being kind. And in that touch, I felt something crystal clear. He wasn't loving me. He was owning the version of me he could control. I smiled faintly, because he had no idea. That version of me was about to disappear permanently. On the 10th day of my ghost period, I made my first real move. Not at Northgate. At my bank. I walked in during lunch, dressed like I belonged, which technically I did. The woman behind the desk smiled the way people smile at someone they assume has stability. I opened a new private account. I moved the majority of my savings. And when I saw the balance land, I felt something I hadn't felt in a year. Safety. The next stop was a real estate lawyer. I sat in a clean office that smelled like paper and quiet authority, and I said the words out loud. I need a formal notice drafted, 30 days to vacate. The lawyer didn't blink, just nodded. Your tenant? My boyfriend, I said. That was the first time I heard it said that way. Not partner, not love. Boyfriend, occupant, temporary. And the shift was so sharp it almost made me dizzy. The lawyer asked for details, and I gave them. Ownership, documentation, timelines. Then I added the second request. And I need an itemized invoice, I said, for his share of household expenses for the past year. The lawyer's pen paused. You kept records? I stared at the wall for a moment. No, I said honestly, but he did. I pulled my phone out and slid it across the desk, showing the screenshots I'd quietly taken from Ethan's Notes app when he left it open on the couch. Lines and lines of numbers. Dates, costs. Not because he planned to pay me back. Because he planned to remind me what I owed him emotionally. The lawyer's expression cooled as he read. He's keeping score, she said. I nodded once. Yes, I whispered. So am I. The night before the gala, Marcus called me into his office, his actual office this time, at Northgate's headquarters. He stood at the window again, city lights cutting across his face. Tomorrow, he said, Croft will stand up there and tell them Sterling Thorne is tradition and strength. He turned slightly, and then I'm going to walk in and remind them tradition is just another word for slow. I swallowed. And me? Marcus's eyes found mine. You, he said, voice quiet and lethal, are the surprise. My hands were still, my heartbeat steady. This wasn't about revenge in the childish way people imagine. This was about a truth Ethan refused to see. You don't get to degrade someone in private and then act shocked when they stop treating you like family. Marcus watched me for a long moment. Are you ready? He asked. I thought of Ethan's snort, the smug little smirk. The way he had touched my cheek like I was a pet he could train. I lifted my chin. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Marcus's smile was small. Good, he said, disappear one more night. When I got home, Ethan was already dressed for the gala. Black suit, crisp white shirt, cufflinks that gleamed like he wanted the room to notice his wrists. He looked expensive. He looked practiced. And for the first time, I looked at him and realized something that made my stomach twist. He didn't look like my boyfriend. He looked like a stranger who had been living in my home. He glanced at me on the couch in my sweatpants disguise and gave me that same pitying look. Don't wait up, he said. It's going to be a late night of networking. I smiled up at him, soft and supportive. Have fun, I said. Make good connections. Ethan's grin widened. That's the spirit. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. Quick, dismissive, like a stamp. Then he walked out, and the door clicked shut. I sat there for a moment in the quiet apartment. Then I stood, and I went to the front door. I pressed my fingers against the lock, and I whispered, so softly it was almost a prayer, 30 days. Because when Ethan came back tonight, the apartment would still be mine. But his place in my life? That was already gone. The day of the gala arrived with the kind of quiet that feels staged. The city outside our windows moved like it always did. Cars, horns, footsteps. But inside the apartment, everything felt suspended, as if time itself was holding its breath. Ethan left early. He always did on days that mattered to him. I watched from the kitchen doorway as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, shoulders squared, jaw set in that expression he practiced. Competent, upward moving, chosen. He didn't ask what I planned to do that evening. He already knew the answer. Nothing. That was the role he'd written for me. I might not be back until very late, he said, checking his watch. After parties. You know how it is. I nodded from behind my coffee mug. Of course. He paused, studying me for half a second, like he was making sure I wouldn't embarrass him by needing anything. You okay? He asked. Not because he cared, but because caring looked good on him. I'm fine, I said, and this time it wasn't an act. Ethan kissed my forehead again, automatic, absent, and walked out the door. The lock clicked, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was pretending. I walked to the window and watched him cross the street, his polished shoes flashing under the streetlights. He never looked back. I didn't expect him to. An hour later, I was standing in front of my closet, sliding a garment bag off the rack. Inside was the suit Marcus had insisted on. Custom, clean lines, dark, confident fabric that didn't beg for attention. It commanded it. When I put it on, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Not because I looked richer, but because I looked finished, like someone who had already survived something. My phone buzzed. Marcus, car outside in 10. I took one last look around the apartment. The couch where Ethan had explained my life to me. The kitchen counter where he'd poured drinks and measured his superiority in ounces. The spare bedroom where I rebuilt myself while he slowly decided I was beneath him. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt clear. The museum glowed like a jewel box dropped into the city. Marble steps, spotlights, the hum of wealth disguised as philanthropy. I entered through a side door, guided by a staff member who didn't ask questions. Because at this level, questions are replaced by assumptions. The air inside was thick with perfume, power, and practiced laughter. People wore their success like armor. And somewhere in this room was Ethan, holding a drink, scanning faces, making sure he was seen by the right ones. I stayed back, just beyond the main hall, listening. Then the lights dimmed. Applause rolled through the space like thunder. Alistair Croft took the stage. He was exactly how Ethan described him. Silver-haired, confident, voice tuned perfectly to command silence without asking for it. He spoke about tradition, legacy, the strength of Sterling Thorne. I watched faces in the crowd soften with pride. This was their church, and Croft was their priest. Then came the promotion announcement. I felt it before I saw it, the tension in the room tightening like a wire. Ethan stood straighter, his shoulders pulled back, his mouth twitched with anticipation. Croft smiled. "And it is my distinct pleasure," he said, "to announce the promotion of our newest partner." The name wasn't Ethan's. The silence afterward wasn't polite. It was sharp. I saw Ethan's face from across the room. The shock first, then the fury he tried to bury under a smile that didn't quite fit anymore. But Croft wasn't finished. "And now," he continued, "it is my honor to introduce a very special guest, a man who represents the future of our industry." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Please welcome," Croft said, "the CEO of Northgate Capital, Mr. Marcus Thorne." The room shifted. Whispers, heads turning, shock blooming like ink in water. Marcus walked onto the stage with the calm of someone who knew he had just changed the temperature of the room. He shook Croft's hand, took the microphone, and smiled, not warmly, but knowingly. He spoke about innovation, about disruption, about the danger of confusing legacy with relevance. And then he paused. "And to lead our most aggressive expansion yet," Marcus said, eyes sweeping the crowd, "I've brought on someone with the sharpest strategic mind I've encountered in years." Ethan was frozen now. He didn't know why, but he knew something was wrong. "A woman your own industry cast aside," Marcus continued, "and whom we were more than happy to recognize." He turned slightly toward the wings. "Please welcome the Vice President of Special Projects at Northgate Capital." My name echoed through the hall, Caroline Stewart, and I stepped onto the stage. The room didn't just go quiet. It collapsed inward. I saw Ethan then, really saw him. His face drained of color, his mouth open, not forming words, his eyes flicking wildly like the world had betrayed him personally. The woman he had snorted at, the woman he told didn't belong. Standing under the lights of his most sacred room, I didn't look at him. I shook Marcus's hand. I took the microphone. "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "It's an honor to be here." The crowd stirred. "I'm looking forward," I continued, "to showing you exactly what I'm capable of." I didn't need to say more. The damage was already done. Later, as applause turned into chaos, whispers, phones lifted, faces turning toward Ethan with dawning understanding, I felt someone push through the crowd. "Caroline." His voice was sharp, desperate. "We need to talk." I turned slowly, wearing my most polite expression. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "Have we met?" His face cracked. Security stepped in gently but firmly, guiding him away like a liability. That was the last thing he ever was to me. When Ethan finally returned home in the early hours of the morning, the apartment was dark. The locks were changed, and taped neatly to the door, the 30-day notice, and the invoice. He stood there alone, suit wrinkled, world dismantled by the one person he never thought capable of it. I wasn't there to watch. I didn't need to be, because the truth had already done its work. I didn't see Ethan's face when he found the notice. I didn't hear the knock on the door, didn't hear the first call go to voicemail, didn't hear the second, or the third, or the fourth. I was already somewhere else, mentally and physically, because the night of the gala wasn't the end. It was just the moment the world finally noticed what had already shifted. The next morning, my phone lit up. "Ethan," 12 missed calls. "Ethan, Caroline, this isn't funny. Ethan, we need to talk right now. Ethan, you embarrassed me. Ethan, you blindsided me." I stared at the screen while brushing my teeth, the mint sharp and grounding. Embarrassed him. Not hurt, not confused, not betrayed. Embarrassed. I let that word settle. Then I turned the phone face down and went to work. Northgate was electric that morning. People stopped pretending they didn't stare when I walked past. Executives who had barely nodded at me days before were suddenly eager to introduce themselves. Not because they liked me, because power had publicly chosen me. Marcus passed me in the hallway and said quietly, "Well played." That wasn't a play, I replied. That was alignment. His smile sharpened. Even better. By noon, the story had spread. Not the real one. The version people could digest. How Sterling Thorne's rising executive had mocked his girlfriend. How she'd turned out to be Northgate's new VP. How no one at Sterling Thorne had known. The narrative crystallized quickly, the way corporate gossip always does. Ethan wasn't just cruel. He was reckless. And recklessness is unforgivable when reputation is currency. That afternoon, his lawyer emailed mine. The subject line screamed confidence. Unlawful eviction. Formal notice. My lawyer called me within minutes. He's bluffing, she said calmly, and he knows it. I sat at my desk, sunlight slicing across the table. Send the response. She did. One document, neatly assembled. Copy of the deed, my name only. Timeline of occupancy, itemized invoice for unpaid expenses, screenshots of Ethan's own financial notes, a sworn affidavit from a Sterling Thorne colleague who overheard Ethan mocking me at work. The reply was professional, polite, final. The email stopped that day. Ethan didn't. He tried to show up at Northgate once. Security escorted him out before he reached the lobby. He left a message that night, voice tight, controlled, unfamiliar. You didn't have to destroy me, he said. I listened once, then deleted it. Because here's the thing no one warns you about when you finally choose yourself. The people who benefited from your silence will call your boundaries violence. At Sterling Thorne, the shift was immediate. Ethan wasn't invited into rooms anymore. His calendar cleared. He was reassigned to internal review, a corporate purgatory where ambition goes to suffocate quietly. People stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped returning his calls. Because the unspoken rule had changed. He wasn't impressive anymore. He was risky. And then came the deal. My first major project at Northgate. A firm Sterling Thorne had been courting for months. Slow negotiations, endless approvals, legacy politics. I used what I knew. Their pace, their pressure points, their arrogance. We closed the acquisition in 6 weeks. Publicly. Decisively. The press called it a humiliation. Inside Sterling Thorne, it was worse. Alistair Croft didn't yell. That was his cruelty. He called Ethan into his office, closed the door, and spoke softly. Explained that Ethan's judgment was now a liability. That his presence reminded the firm of their biggest failure in years. That there was no future for him there. Ethan was fired before the end of the week. I saw him once after that. Months later. I was leaving a meeting, stepping into a waiting car when I noticed him across the street. He was carrying a cardboard box. Office supplies, papers, a plant that looked like it hadn't been watered in weeks. He looked smaller, not poor, just hollowed out. He saw me. Hatred flashed across his face, not sadness, not regret. Hatred, like I had stolen something from him. I met his eyes, and I nodded. Not smug, not cruel, just finished. The car door closed, and we went in opposite directions. People ask sometimes, quietly, carefully, if I regret how it ended, if I feel bad, if I think I went too far. I always answer the same way. I didn't destroy him. I stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own beliefs. He built his life on perception and hierarchy. I simply removed myself from beneath him. And without someone to stand on, he fell.